People ask that of wind developers all the time. Hey, when this turbine goes in on my farm, am I going to have cheaper electricity? You know, if the power goes out, are we going to have power when everybody else does not? And the answer to that is no. It's certainly not. That electricity goes into the grid, and we truthfully don't even know where it ends up. The utilities have to buy that energy from a wind developer under a fixed price. But that contract can be sold anywhere, and those actual electrons, of course, we have no idea where they go. They could be anywhere, which is why we don't really know what the emission savings have been in the state of Michigan from the roughly 1,000 megawatts of wind we've built so far. We don't know if that wind generation has offset coal generation in Minnesota, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana. We have no idea if we've seen any real environmental benefit from these turbines in the state of Michigan. We don't think anybody should be compelled to live within 1,000 feet of an industrial wind turbine without consent or compensation for the loss of quality of life. Only the person who actually hosts the physical turbine on their property receives any compensation. If you live on a 1-acre parcel next to a large farm, the farmer who owns that property may not even live in the county or in the state. You are living next to it. The farmer will receive $5,000 to $10,000 per year per turbine. You will get the noise, you will get the shadow flicker, you'll get no reduction in your electrical bill, you'll get nothing but the ill effects with no compensation. Several of the major turbine manufacturers that are building a lot of turbines in the United States already have published setback data that say 1,640 feet is the distance an employee should retreat to in the event of a fire, or if the brakes fail on the turbine and it goes into an overspeed situation. So, 1,640 feet is a substantial distance, but Consumers Energy and Detroit Edison and other wind developers are routinely placing turbines far closer than that to people's homes. Consumers Energy has turbines less than 1,000 feet from people's homes, despite the manufacturers of those turbines, Vestas, stating 1,640 feet is how far the employees need to run away in the event of a fire. So we would think at bare minimum 1,640 feet from a 500-foot tall turbine should be the minimum distance from that turbine to a non-participating person's property line. But routinely they measure those setback distances from the turbine to your home, which means you can lose large areas of your own property to any future development for your own needs because of the way the zoning is written. Wind turbines by themselves don't produce enough reliable power to dependably power anything. They first have to be tied to either a natural gas or coal plant, which will always produce by far the majority share of the energy. The most wind energy can do in terms of powering a home is only occasionally reduce the amount of coal or natural gas that a fossil fuel plant might consume at any point in time. But a wind turbine by itself can power nothing. Nothing that depends on reliable, predictable, dependable, and affordable energy. So a wind turbine cannot power a house unless you first attach it to a coal or gas plant. Well, I was on a local planning commission here in Lenawee County when the wind developers approached us and they wanted us to change our zoning to accommodate their project. And the longer I study these issues, the more I try to do my due diligence in deciding what's safe in terms of protecting the health, safety, and welfare of people in my own community. I realized the developers were not really being candid with us about the impacts of industrial wind turbines. Well, ultimately, I was not reappointed to the Planning Commission in my township because of my vocal opposition to the unsafe siting that was being proposed by the turbine developer. So, as a result of that, we realized there were many like-minded people in our township who had similar concerns, and we worked aggressively towards creating safe zoning language that would protect everybody and require the developers to get consent and offer some sort of compensation to everybody being impacted by these things. And we were successful in getting that done. The ordinance we created was put to the vote. The developers were opposed to it, and we prevailed at the ballot box 64 to 36%. The developers then, though they could have offered compensation to everybody in the turbine footprint, decided that was a price too high to pay, and they left town, which is common everywhere. When these ordinances are put to a vote, the so-called anti-wind people generally prevail by significant margins, anywhere from 55 to 45 to as high as in Reading Township in Hillsdale last month. They defeated Duke Energy 71 to 29%. So the people, when given a chance to speak, do speak clearly. How far away from an industrial wind turbine do you need to be so that the noise impacts are not significant to the people who live in the community? We think the work of Dr. Jerry Punch from Michigan State was really quite good. He was proposing a 40 decibel noise limit and a half-mile setback from turbines to homes. We think that's a reasonable setback. We don't think people should have to live closer than that to these turbines without consent or being offered some sort of compensation for their loss of quality of life. Levels. One is just the physical impacts. A certain percentage of people living within the footprint of these turbine projects will experience a fair amount of sleep disruption and other adverse health effects. The mechanism isn't completely understood, but I know many of these people personally, and the symptoms are real. It drives them to litigation. It drives them to extreme measures to avoid the sound, including living in their basement and building bunkers in their homes to get away from the noise. But then there's also another issue, is what is safe for the social fabric of the community. And wind developments are decidedly unsafe for the social fabric of rural communities. We see that across the state. The difference between the people who get the lease and get the lease money versus those who bear the impacts is so profound. It shreds communities. People in churches lose relationships in churches. People stop going to church. Brothers and sisters don't speak anymore. Husbands and wives have separated over this issue. Fathers and sons end up on opposite sides of this issue. The rural community is terribly devastated by this. And it's not just residents who live in the farming areas and don't farm. Many farmers are just as bitterly divided about this, upset that one farmer has leased his farm and he is not leasing his farm as an opposed, and they, the good times at the coffee shop are destroyed over this. Well, understand, stopping by in the middle of the day to listen to a wind plant in operation, when they operate at a very low capacity factor, the point being, wind only shows up occasionally to make these things turn. So the odds are very good that on any given day, particularly in the middle of the day, if you stop and listen to a wind plant, you may not find the sound too troubling. The developers are always very clever about this. They always avoid the real hot button issues, and they try to minimize everything, saying there's no statistical evidence of property value impacts from wind turbines, and the turbines won't be any noisier than a refrigerator or even a library. They told us that here. It won't be any noisier than a library. Until they're up in operation, and you realize then this isn't true at all. No library has a 383-foot diameter rotor spinning 1,000 feet from my bedroom window, sending pulsations of low frequency noise into my room so that I can feel it in my chest. Libraries don't work that way. So there's a huge difference between what the wind developers tell you before the project goes up versus what your experience is after the fact. And so as these projects are being built out in Michigan, there's more people like myself who've observed the misinformation campaigns of the wind developers and then seen what the reality has become after they've gone in. You say, hey, this isn't reasonable, this is not just, these guys are not being honest. And it drives you to want to continue to warn people ahead of time. Don't believe pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's a bag of tricks here. We know that modern natural gas-fired combined cycle turbines will reduce carbon dioxide emissions and mercury emissions and fine particulate emissions about 6 times more cheaply than adding wind generation to our existing mix. And the electricity they produce is just plain cheaper. So it's a bad deal environmentally as well. We have spent about $2.5 billion on wind energy in Michigan, plus transmission, and we do not know to this date how much coal emissions have been reduced. We don't know how much, if any, mercury emissions have been reduced. We have no idea how much, if any, fine particulate emissions have been reduced in the state of Michigan because of this $2.5 billion spent on wind plus transmission. However, had we spent that same money on natural gas generation, we would have cut emissions substantially, because gas, unlike wind, can actually replace a coal plant. You can shut that coal plant down permanently and replace it with a gas plant, but wind turbines can't do that. Including some landowners being held responsible for the ill effects of the turbines, where the neighbors say, I've had enough of the noise, the nuisance shadow flicker, all the other ill effects, and they so actually sue the host farmer who's actually hosting the turbine. And these leases are incredibly predatory. If you have an attorney read a proposed wind lease, they will almost always recommend pages and pages of changes to that lease. Most of them are 20 to 30 years and extendable at the developer's option up to 60. But we know of at least one lease in Indiana where Iberdrola Renewables, a Spanish firm who builds a lot of wind energy in Michigan, the terms of their lease was extendable to 180 years. You essentially are surrendering all future development rights of your parcel to a foreign multinational for generations. And if you don't read the fine print, you can really be in a lot of trouble. And if you compare a wind map between the state of Michigan and the state of Iowa, you'll realize that we have lost already. Yes, we have some wind. Yes, the Thumb is one of our better places for wind, but our best wind is the worst wind Iowa would have anywhere in the state.